Welcome to this module, Free Libraries Aren't Free, part of the Budget and Finance course of the State Library of Iowa's endorsement program. My name is Mary Ann Morey. I'm consultant for the Central District with the State Library of Iowa. At the completion of this module, you should be able to identify the many costs behind the so-called free library resources and services you're providing to the public, define the various budget sources for public libraries in Iowa, demonstrate a basic understanding of the differing roles your library team has regarding the library's budget, and identify the accreditation standards that pertain to your library's funding aspects. We often talk about free public libraries, but that's really a misnomer. In reality, free libraries are a lot like free puppies. And if you've ever fallen hopelessly in love with a free puppy, you know there are actually a lot of expenses involved in puppies. The same is true for free libraries. Consider these. We're quick to tout that we have all these wonderful resources and services, books, computers, meeting rooms, etc., that the public can all use for free. But let's think for a moment about the cost of free. Many of those items, all of those items, in fact, have costs involved with them, some of them adding up to hundreds, thousands, even tens of thousands of dollars each year. And we still need to add all the other expenses of running a library. In addition to what was noted on the previous slide, there are expenses such as staff salaries, likely your highest budget category, programming supplies that might include glue and craft supplies, speakers or presenters, office supplies such as copy paper, ink, and toner, operational supplies, including toilet paper even, building maintenance, planned, such as snow removal, or unplanned, such as plumbing leaks, which are very expensive. The list gets longer and longer, with the dollar total getting bigger and bigger. Cha-ching. So the question is, who pays for all this stuff? Or what are the primary budget sources for public libraries in Iowa? Which brings us to our second learning objective. Most all of Iowa's 500 plus libraries are city libraries. You can tell that by looking at the name. They're usually city name public libraries, such as the examples noted on the slide. Knoxville Public Library, Winterset Public Library, Cedar Rapids Public Library. So it makes sense that for most all of our public libraries, the primary funding comes from the city. The library is, after all, a city department. In our state, cities and counties are mandated by Iowa code to fund libraries through the 6.75 cent tax. Specifically, this Iowa code, section 256.69 says, each city within its corporate boundaries and each county within the unincorporated area of the county shall levy a tax of at least 6.75 cents per $1,000 of assessed value on the taxable property for the purpose of providing financial support to the public library of that jurisdiction. I know you're clapping your hands and thinking, isn't it super great that cities and counties have to provide funding support for libraries? But before you get too excited, realize that this tax is actually an old amount. The code is from the 1970s. The taxing amount is outdated and an inadequate minimum. You would not be able to keep your doors open with this amount. In other words, this mandate is somewhat disappointing for your budget. Based upon some figures one of our librarians computed a few years ago that allowed for inflation, the code's current minimum is closer to 30 cents instead of 6.75 cents. Worse than the mandated minimum taxing amount is the fact that there are some libraries that aren't even receiving that 6.75 cents minimum from their cities or counties. But the fact remains that for the overwhelming majority of Iowa's 500 plus public libraries, funding comes primarily from the library's city, with just over 83% of libraries reporting this fact as noted on the graph. County funding is a smaller portion of libraries' funding pie, around 8%. Other government funding, the gray section on this graph, is state funding. You may be wondering what the bright yellow other or non-governmental income category noted there includes. Some of the following slides will show where libraries receive other funding. While the state doesn't cover a lot of your budget, around 3% statewide of all public libraries' budgets, as you saw on the previous slide, It does provide some income for your library via Enrich Iowa, an umbrella name that covers 3 different funding programs, including direct state aid. This is the money your library can receive if it participates in the voluntary statewide accreditation program overseen by the state library. Meeting standards puts your library into one of 3 tier levels, all of which receive some state tax dollars. Open access. This is reimbursement for the number of physical items you loan to residents of other incorporated participating cities. Interlibrary loan reimbursement. This pays a subsidy for each physical item you loan to other Iowa libraries. Although your library does not receive any direct federal funds, federal library dollars are given to the state library, which in turn passes along benefits to you in the form of resources. Federal dollars from the Institute of Museum and Library Services, or IMLS, cover a lot of the programs your state library offers for all public libraries in Iowa, including these: the summer reading program materials, continuing education and endorsement. Iowa Share is our statewide library delivery system. Assorted online resources, building or space needs grants, the state data center, Silo, which includes state-sponsored email and the interlibrary loan services, Plow, the state-sponsored websites, and a circulating collection of professional development books available for checkout from the state library's collection. Again, you don't receive the direct funding from federal dollars, but these furnished resources mean that your library doesn't have to pay to receive these services and resources. The following slides will show you where the library's bright yellow non-governmental funds often come from. Many libraries rely on grant funding to help with their budgets. If you are interested in grant funding for your library, you need look no further than your own library. Since 2019, the state library has provided this online resource, Foundation Directory, to all public libraries in Iowa. It's a grant finding resource that enables nonprofits to enter their various needs. Enter your organization type, the grant project type, the dollar amount needed, and in return, you can receive a list of potential grantors. The resource is not only useful for libraries, but also for other nonprofit entities in your city. Talk with your district office staff at the state library for more information if your library hasn't yet enacted and promoted this resource on your library's website. A lot of our public libraries have separate nonprofit organizations that have been formed solely for the purpose of supporting the library. These groups are known as Friends of the Library or the Library Foundation, or in the case of some libraries, the groups may have been combined into one organization known as the Friends Foundation. These groups conduct fundraisers on the library's behalf and generate monies that are used to supplement, not replace, the library's budget. Most of the time, the funding is used for special purchases above and beyond the library's normal budgetary expenditures, or the funds are used for a building campaign. Talk with your state library district consultant if you want to learn more about library friends and foundations. Another way that many libraries add to their budget is through donations. Most libraries will have a guesstimated income amount designated as donations and anticipate a small amount as part of their regular budget. But occasionally, a library may receive a windfall of money through unexpected donations, such as a bequest or special memorial gifts. It is important to remember that any monies given to the library are city funds and must be reported to your city. Unexpected donations that far surpass your budget may require a budget amendment before you can spend the funds. Talk with your city clerk about that process. Here's our next learning objective, being able to demonstrate basic understanding of the differing roles among your library team as pertains to budgeting. Knowing the roles of your library team members can help you avoid a lot of headaches and budget blunders. When all the players of the team fulfill the role they're supposed to do, your budgetary aspects will be much smoother, even if the dollar amounts aren't higher. So who all is on your budget team? You've got at least 5 team players: the city, county, your library board, you, the library director, and the state library. Let's do a quick overview of each team member's role. The city's primary role is funding. Remember that cities hold the purse strings for the library. Cities determine the amount of tax dollars that they allocate to the library's budget. This slide reminds us of all the actions the city does regarding budgets and the financing of the library. In addition to providing a bulk of the library's budget, the city should also be overseeing the payment of your library's invoices. It's the city clerk's role, or perhaps the city finance officer's role, to do this. That same city employee should be providing financial reports in the form of budget reports to your library on a monthly and/or as-needed basis. The city has a responsibility and obligation to account for public funds, so while it cannot dictate your library's budget, how it's spent, it does need to know how those monies are spent. County supervisors determine the amount of rural tax dollars that are allocated to the library's budget, so the county's role is also funding. In most examples, counties determine the dollar amount, and the libraries within the county determine the distribution formula of the funds, often including a base amount to all the libraries within the county, with the remainder of the funding distributed according to considerations such as population numbers or circulation of materials to rural patrons. Library boards have a great deal of authority over the library's budget. Although the city allocates the money, it's the board's authority and role to set up the annual budget with the line items and to approve the library's monthly bills. Thus, the library board's overall budgetary role can be described as governance. Library boards also need to understand that there are state laws regarding accountability of public funds. Cities have a better grasp of that, while boards seem less aware. On the flip side, boards better understand their own authority as administrative boards better than some city councils understand it. Regarding accountability, boards need to remember that cities must account for all public dollars. It is imperative and legally required that libraries report to their cities all incomes and all expenditures. Library directors also have a long list of duties pertaining to their role within the budget team. It's the director who is working with the library's budget on a practically daily basis. Because of that, the library director's primary role in the budget process is management. Here are some basic duties of the director. Draft the annual budget, which the board approves. Make the purchases, managing the spending and pacing of the spending throughout the year. Assuming that the city clerk or finance officer is providing monthly financial reports to the director, it is then the director who includes those reports for the board at each monthly meeting. And the director also needs to understand that public funds need to be accounted. Library directors should have a good grasp on the library's budget since they will need to report financial information on the state-required annual survey. Many directors also write grants for their libraries. While a director doesn't need a degree in accounting, having a good grasp of basic math skills, as well as a basic understanding of budgeting and record keeping or bookkeeping, certainly comes in handy for library directors. In the previous slide, it was noted that directors need to oversee the pacing of spending the library's budget throughout the year. The director is responsible for divvying out the monthly allocations and making the monthly purchases for books and other materials, programming costs, staffing expenses, etc. If you divide your total library budget into 12 months, you'll see that it equals 8.3333%. So if you set a target of spending 8.33% of the budget each month, you'll be able to stay on track, barring any emergencies, all year. This slide gives you a general look at where your total budgetary spending should be at the end of each month of the fiscal year, which in Iowa runs from July 1st through June 30th. Realize that some large annual expenditures, such as insurance premiums or contract fees, may cause a perceived disruption, but take them into account with the overall budgetary picture. The state library's role in your budget is to provide your Enrich Iowa funding, as we already noted in a previous slide, and to provide consulting assistance with any of your budget-related questions. We also provide continuing education regarding budgetary topics, such as the module you're viewing now. Let's do a little review of how these roles all come together to make good teamwork in regards to the library's budget. If you have completed the library law endorsement course, you will recall that your library's ordinance is like the library's birth certificate. It's the legal document that created your library in your city. That ordinance is based upon state law, specifically Section 392.5 of Iowa Code. Assuming that your library is set up with an administrative board, and all but a couple of Iowa's 500 plus public libraries are established this way, the library's ordinance should state that the library board has authority over the library's budget, that it is the board that approves expenditures and controls gifts and bequests to the library. This authority is granted by Section 392.5 of Iowa Code, which says a library board may accept and control the expenditure of all gifts, devices, and bequests to the library. While the library board does have authority over the library's finances and expenditures, this does not exempt the board from properly providing financial information to the city. Although the library board has the authority to decide how library funding is spent, it still needs to report all income and expenditures to the city. We state library consultants routinely encourage our library boards to work in good partnership with their cities regarding all aspects, including financial ones. The library board controls the library's expenditures, but it's the city that controls the purse strings and allocates how much of a budget your library can expend. Unless, of course, you happen to be an endowed library, in which case you likely are not dependent entirely upon the city for your entire funding, but may still rely on the city for partial funding. Those libraries are definitely in the minority. Talk with your district consultant if you have questions about being an endowed library. It is very important to understand the library board's role regarding the library's finances and to likewise understand the city's role regarding the library's funding. Too often when these roles are not properly understood, the tug-of-war argument over money occurs, and that's never a good thing. This at-a-glance slide gives an overview of the roles we just discussed in previous slides. As a review, realize that the library director makes routine purchases and presents the bills to the library board for their approval. The library board approves the library's line item totals for the budget and approves all bills for payment. Your city clerk pays the bills and provides monthly budget reports to the library. The city council appropriates the bottom line funding of your library. One thing to be aware of, your city council will likely still approve the library's submitted bills. While the city clerk and city council should be kept informed of the library's expenditures and the status of the library's budget on a monthly basis, the council has no real legally recognizable power to disapprove expenditures already approved by the library board. That being said, we at the State Library advise librarians and library trustees of the following information from the Iowa League of Cities as provided in their clerk's manual. Quote, after the library board approves library bills and the general operation of the library director should coordinate information with the city finance officer to ensure the bills are added to the list of claims provided to the city council and published. This ensures that the expenditures are published in accordance with requirements in the Iowa Code and that the general ledger is kept current. While this is not mandated, both the auditor of the state and the State Library of Iowa encourage this preferred method. As with any other department, the library cannot spend more than has been allocated unless the budget is formally amended. Accordingly, the library and the city must work together to determine whether a formal budget amendment is required to account for possible expenditure overtures or unanticipated revenues. It is often beneficial for the city council to receive a monthly or quarterly financial report from the library board to ensure the library's budget is fiscally sound. Although the library board has more autonomy than most city departments, it is short-sighted to think of the library as separate from the city. It is better to think of the city and library as a team working together to make life in your community the best it can be. If you noted in previous slides, it is the role of the city clerk, or city finance officer if you have one, to write checks on behalf of the library in order to pay the library staff and the library's bills. If your library, meaning the director or the trustee, is writing its own checks and handling its own checking account, you need to correct this situation. The State Library recommends that the city do the financial accounting, write checks for the library's expenditures after authorization by the board, and submit monthly financial reports to the board. The Iowa League of Cities and the State Auditor's Office will advise you the same way. You are putting your library board in a very liable situation if you are asking a trustee to be responsible for writing checks and managing payroll. Our state law library has provided us with this information. From a legal standpoint, it is best to let the city absorb the liability for financial transactions, especially payroll. If the trustees pay the bills and payroll, the individual trustees can be sued. If the city pays the bills and payroll, the city gets sued. The Iowa League of Cities and most city attorneys insist that the city handle all financial transactions for its agencies, including the payroll, in order to reduce the city's legal liabilities. Let's cover our final learning objective now, identifying accreditation standards that pertain to your library's funding aspects. As a brief reminder, the accreditation program is overseen by the state library as a means of determining state funding for public libraries based upon the library meeting specific standards as outlined in this book, In Service to Iowa, which is available on the state library's website. As we earlier reviewed the various roles of the team players in the library's budget process, we saw that the city's and the county's team role is funding, the board's role is governance, and the director's role is management. Here's a rundown of how those roles are defined in the state standards book, In Service to Iowa. The numbers in parentheses represent the number of the current coinciding standard. The city and county should be funding the library, allowing for paid staff, allowing staff to participate in professional organizations, conferences, and continuing education, and ensure that materials are added regularly to the library's collection. Standard 32 currently states that 3% is the recommended amount to add to your collection annually. Next, these are the standards that pertain to the library board's role within the budgetary process. Standard 2 says that the board has the legal authority over the library's budget and over all gifts, bequests, and donations. Standard 3 notes that the library board adopts an annual budget. Note that this means the board establishes the line items of your library's budget. You'll recall that it's the city that actually sets the bottom dollar amount that your library receives. Standard 13 says the library follows statutory requirements as to fiscal year audits and budgeting and submits annual and other reports as requested by its funding authorities. Standard 10 talks about the library receiving permanent and equitable funding from the county. And while you might think this is a duty of the county, and it is, it's also a duty of the board to help advocate for equitable funding. Finally, here are the standards that address the director's role regarding the library's budget. Very few of our standards actually address how your budget should be spent, since it is the board's role to determine that. However, Standard 32 does put a percentage on the amount of new materials you add to your physical library collection each year. It says the library purchases or adds materials at regular intervals throughout the year. On average, 3% or more of the collection is added. This would be a responsibility of the director. Remembering who is part of your team and allowing or encouraging each to do its specific role regarding your library's finances can make the budgeting process much smoother. Remember that these entities should not be battling each other, but instead should truly view themselves as team players whose goal it is to provide the best possible library services for your community's residents. This concludes our module about free libraries aren't free.